morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Education Action Network radio show on this Thursday, the 22nd day of November in the year of our Lord 2012. I am Harry Matthews, the Education Action Network administrator, and your host for this morning's show. Today we will be speaking with former Gilbert Public Schools Governing Board member Shane Stapley, who was the inspiration for the recently concluded Citizens Budget Committee for the Gilbert Unified School District Governing Board. Shane, are you online?
I'm here, Harry. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, and how are you today, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Well, it's good to have you on the show. But please tell us, why did you suggest the convening of a Citizens Budget Committee for the Gilbert Public Schools District, and what did you hope to accomplish?
That's a good question. Earlier on, and one of my reasons for running for school board to begin with was to try to bring more transparency, more disclosure, opening up the books as they were to the public at large, and hopefully trying to get a much better understanding of the overall budget process that is our public education system, and have the general citizenry play a much larger role in making decisions as it comes to expenses, prioritization of spending, and so forth within our schools. We read these reports nationwide that as a general rule, public education is failing. And yet, year over year, we find that we spend more and more on education, and in the public arena, at the very least. And we're finding that what many have always felt, that we're just not spending enough in education. Well, if we continue to spend more and more, shouldn't we be seeing gradual improvements in education rather than the opposite? And our statistics continue to show that is not the case. It seems as though the more we spend, the worse off we are.
Sure. And what was the process that you went through in order to get the ball rolling to convince the district to assemble this committee?
You know, I suppose that from one district to the next, there are different processes for how a district begins to gain traction, to do anything different, or to start up a new program per se. In the Gilbert Public School System, I think our process with this particular board has modified slightly. There are some philosophical differences between board members, and yet I think what everybody could agree on, or maybe had different motivations for agreeing with it, but for the most part, the agreement is that we need to have a better accountability for where monies are being spent, and who's going to ever say that, well, what we really shouldn't do is ever include the taxpayer in the process. That's political suicide. And so I proposed, as an effort to again bring more transparency and disclosure to the general public on where money is being spent, to start up a citizens budget committee, and that was first suggested about this time last year, February, March, as an item for future consideration. Most things anymore now are brought up as an item for future consideration on our agenda. Part of that is due to open meeting law requirements. The other part, I think, and fear, is that it also tends to slow the process down. And again, those philosophical differences that exist between board members, requiring these items like this to be made as an item for future consideration, can help slow the process down rather than bringing these items up in an agenda straight away, or beginning a process that the district certainly has the full capability of starting a process like this without needing board approval or board involvement. But again, because these sorts of things are not necessarily in the best interests of the district bureaucracies, the district boards, they really would rather you just hand them their bucket of money and they decide how to spend it and go about their merry way. And yet there are two primary responsibilities for all school boards across the state. And those two primary responsibilities, there are many responsibilities. As a matter of fact, the school board, the buck stops with the school board. They're responsible entirely for what's in Title 15 at the local level. Title 15 is the section of Arizona Revised Statutes that deals with public education. And again, you may find philosophical differences within board members as to what their responsibilities are with regards to Title 15. But for me personally, I took an oath of office to support the Constitution of the United States and to defend it, as well as the Arizona Constitution, and to defend it. And within the Arizona Constitution is the mandate for public education. And so I took very seriously my responsibility in the two areas that are the most important, and that is budget and budgetary concerns within the district, having that fiduciary responsibility for knowing where the monies are being spent and how are they being spent, as well as the policies, general policies that govern the daily actions and administration of our public education system within Gilbert. Given those two responsibilities, I felt it incumbent on me to start a process or a mechanism by which we can engage the public in a forum, disclose information that are the expenses, and so that we can start setting priorities. How successful was the process? Well,
I was going to ask you that.
That the process actually happened, I suppose, is a measure of success in and of itself. I personally was disappointed with the overall outcome because the overall outcome did not include the very goals that I stated at the very beginning that were desired, the deliverables of this process when I first suggested it a year ago, were to have a breakdown of expenses that we as a board consider when we consider the annual budget. And when we look across that budget, if there are any monies that need to be either trimmed in order to meet budgetary guidelines, or there is, let's say that from one year to the next, there's a surplus of available funding. Where should that money be spent? Where would we prioritize? If there was, say, let's say there's an extra $1 million, where would that $1 million go? What should we spend that $1 million on first? Now you have philosophical differences, and the line is very long, and the expenses certainly, the expense categories certainly are more than sufficient to swallow that $1 million. Even if there was another zero attached, they could. No matter how much money you have, you'll find somewhere to stick it. No doubt. Exactly. And so, I mean, that is human nature in general. Our capacity to spend far exceeds our means available. And
let me ask you.
In short, sorry, Harry, just to finish that thought, what I wanted as a set of deliverables and what I hoped to engage the public with was where would we spend that money? What's the prioritization? For every dollar that's spent, what is the prioritization?
Did you get any, did you get anything from that? Or did you get a list of priorities or anything like that?
You know, I had pretty well considered, based on how the committee was organized, the schedule that was put forth, and what was being shared with the individual groups and so forth, I had pretty well considered this whole entire exercise a dismal failure until just prior to the very last meeting. Now, the last meeting was intended to be a feedback loop where we shared results with the individual committee members and so forth. The second to the last meeting, we were supposed to have had a very clear understanding from each group what the prioritization on spending was. That did not
Mm-hmm.
exist. What we ended
Wow.
up with were three areas, three priorities, if you will, for how to generate more income. As a school board, for efforts like this, it's not the school board that runs the committee. It's the school administration. It's, again, we come back to the bureaucracy. So as a school board, we can give the instructions to the superintendent for what we're looking for. And unfortunately, the superintendent, I like Dave Allison. I think Dr. Dave Allison is a fantastic man. I think his heart is in the right place in education. I think he has the best interests of the students at heart. But when it came to meeting the stated goal from the very beginning of prioritization on spending, we had anything but.
So, in other words, basically what you're telling me is, well, the only thing they came up with is three priorities of how to generate more income?
Well, because of how things were proposed, like, for example, when in the first meeting that when we got everybody together, of course, there needs to be somewhat of an education aspect, because you've got folks from different walks of life, different backgrounds, and so forth on this committee. And that was the intent, was to have some disparity and not disparity.
Well, that brings to another thing. How was the committee actually assembled?
Committee was
what was
assembled,
the process of assembling the committee?
You know, and that was something that, good, bad, or indifferent. The committee was assembled as an example of what Mesa had done prior. Dr. Cowan, the superintendent in Mesa, went through a similar exercise where he identified 40 people from the general public and from within the district and so forth, and so David Allison decided to follow Dr. Cowan's example as well, and again, whether it was effective or not, good, bad, or indifferent.
What was that process?
That process was for each board member to select 5 people out of 40, and so with 5 board members selecting 5 people, we have a total of 25 individuals.
Uh-huh.
The remaining 15 individuals were selected by Dr. David Allison himself, and he chose primarily district staff.
Wow. So he
principals, teachers, district administration members, and so forth.
So basically, you're getting hand-picked people here, which that makes up a pretty large percentage of the entire process. I mean, you're talking, he's already picked almost 40%, 39% of the people going into it, and then you've got. So
you make a valid point, because of those 40 people, our process involved dividing that 40 people down into smaller work groups so that they could deal with various areas of the budget. And what was decided was that we would divide the budget up into divide the group up into 8 different groups of 5. And so with 15 people picked, you have now 3 on each group of 5, right?
So basically, it sounds like what's going to happen in a situation like that is that the district is going to get what the district wants to get out of the budget committee, so that the thing is stacked and rigged before you even begin the process. I actually went to a couple of those meetings, and it really sort of looked that way to me, where literally Dr. Allison was prompting people for questions. There was one particular situation where somebody would ask a question, and he would correct them and say, no, well, we don't want to ask those kind of questions. Ask these kind of questions.
Yeah, I was there for it. I mean, it may be the very same instance that you're referring to. One of the primary individuals dealing in the finance department was asked a question, and the answer that I heard him give was, That's not the question you should be asking. The question you should be asking is, and he reframed the question in such a way that was far different and had a completely different inference than the original question that was asked, and it effectively steered the conversation away from prioritization on spending, which was the very core, the very goal that we were looking for. And so it's no wonder that what we ended up with was a missed goal. That the deliverables were missed entirely.
Now, you said that, interestingly enough, you started out talking about looking for prioritizing spending, and you ended up talking about looking for ways to generate more money, which seems to be a completely opposite goal as originally was intended. I mean, first of all, the thing about a school district focusing on raising more money, I mean, I feel like they should be focusing on the children and how to improve their education with the funds they have, rather than trying to figure out just how to get more money. To me,
Well, see, that's the misnomer, Harry. Is over and over again, as a general public, all we hear are the 30-second sound bites, right? Because that's about all the time that's ever given, and the sound bites sound good, right? Prop 100 2 years ago ran on the campaign of, isn't your child worth half a cent? Well, who's going to stand up and say, no, my child's not worth half a cent? Who will ever stand up and dare defy that 30-second soundbite? And yet what we have as a result is a passed proposition, which, by the way, is one of the worst ways to legislate. Throw something out like that to the people, and it's completely emotional. And what we end up with is the single largest sales tax increase in 2 decades of Arizona history.
But then didn't necessarily all go to education even.
Well, half of it is supposedly going to education. So of the $1 billion or $3 billion that's raised over 3 years, $1.5 billion.
Was it 1 cent? It was 3 trillion cents. I mean, it's a cent sounds okay. 3 trillion cents. Well, that's a little different,
Right, right, and of course it's viewed as 1% increase, which of course is.
Or am I doing my math right? I forget. 3 billion. What's 3 billion in cents? I can't do it. Maybe it's. No, I guess it's 300 billion cents. Is it something like that? Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a lot more than a penny, though. That's the point.
300 billion pennies. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, but that doesn't look as good on a bumper sticker.
No, that's hard to. That's So the question is your child worth $1 billion? Well, of course, my child's worth $1 billion, isn't yours? I mean, how do you put a price on human life?
Just I don't have $1 billion. That's the only problem.
We got to come back full circle to the whole notion that we started off with. Does more money mean better education?
Yeah, well, of course, according to the Goldwater Institute, we're spending now 4 times as much as we did on education 50 years ago.
That's
and then and our test scores are not higher, and which in and of itself is depressing, because test scores are measured in different ways today than they once were, and not necessarily better. But you said that they had 3 priorities for raising more income. Did you remember what those priorities were?
It wasn't necessarily priorities. It was as a prioritization. I did use the word priority, and I shouldn't have. It was the 3 areas. Give me 3 suggestions.
3 areas.
And so how this opened up to begin with was, here's where we spend money. Here's where we receive money. Now, here are the expenses for this general area, whether it be maintenance and operations, or whether it be transportation, whether it be food services, and these are the various areas of the budget that were considered. And the administrators from the district were there to explain to the members of those various committees that addressed those budgetary areas. So you'd have a 5-member group of the committee discussing transportation and transportation expenses. Another area of the group would be discussing food services. Another area would be discussing maintenance and operations as it pertained to either utilities or because maintenance and operation is a huge group. It really can be broken down into subgroups as well. The single largest area of the budget is generally classified as maintenance and operations, or what they refer to as M&O.
Hey, wait. Let's stop right there, because if you look at the report that came down from the state auditor's office, now they said that over 60% of the budget went to the classroom, and
yes.
Yet what you're saying is that that's not true.
No, it's not what I'm saying. Because what is the classroom? The classroom includes the teacher and the teacher's salary and benefits, right?
Yeah.
So what it takes to run the classroom, it takes the supplies that the students consume. It takes the utilities to keep the lights on in the classroom. It takes paying the teacher's salary and benefits, and having that teacher hired and on staff. So as maintenance and operations has this huge ticket item, this huge expense item that is teacher salaries. And that's the single largest, because this is a labor-intensive. It's education, right? Where are your expenses? The people that are hired to teach, and so because it's a labor-intensive industry, your single largest expense is your labor, your salary, and your benefits, and so your teaching staff being a component of that dollars to the classroom, which I'm sorry, that's somewhat of a misnomer. Until dollars in the classroom is fully vetted and you understand what is meant by dollars to the classroom, because what does that really mean? Because look, I've done the math.
There's more money going to the classroom than, if you look at the numbers, it seems to be there's more money going to the classroom than just the teacher's salary and supplies.
But from one report to the next, the dollars to the classroom, even if budgets stayed exactly the same, the reports for dollars to the classroom may vary because they're counting things differently. One report might count the expense of textbooks, whereas another report might not. I'm just using that as an example. I don't think that's realistic, but I just use that as an example that certain consumables might be included in one category, whereas they're not in the next report the following year or the next time that the audit is done. So you'll have nuances and differences from one report to the next, and yet the report says, hey, XYZ district is putting more dollars into the classroom, because politically, more dollars to the classroom equates to all of us intellectually, even though we have no real basis for this. Intellectually, we think, well, it's more dollars to the classroom, better education. It equals better education. And yet, even still, I have not seen this correlation. What's wonderful about Arizona is we actually have a control group. Scientifically, when we go back and we remember our science classes, and remember when we're going to conduct an experiment on anything that might change the results, we also have to have a control group. Now, for all intents and purposes, our control group in Arizona and even across the nation could be that of private education. So we're talking about the efficiencies and capabilities of public education versus private. And in Arizona, we actually have a kind of a quasi-middle group as well, a blended group that we refer to as charter schools. Now, they fall under the public school umbrella as well, but by and large, we have public schools, which are divided into district schools and charter schools, and then we have private schools. And as we look at each of these entities, and we see the efficiencies of education, and how would you measure one across the other? If you measure the standardized test results as one of the benchmarks, standardized test results, you'll find that district schools underperform, even though they receive the superior funding, even though they receive far more money, they are underperforming as a general rule to charter schools and to private schools. Private schools, while you and I might spend several $1,000s to send our son and daughter to a private school, more often than not, and the average cost per student at a private school is less than the funding received in our district schools.
Yeah, there's a report here from the Cato Institute that was released in 2010, and they said that I'm going to read it right. I'm going to read the report. It says real public school spending is more than 75% higher than the estimated median private school spending of just under $7,000. And interestingly enough, they also state that Phoenix area schools spend 27% more than they report, which goes back to the same thing that you were saying, that when they report things, they sort of fudge the figures in a sense in order to make things look more rosy in certain situations and less rosy in others. Like I don't know, whenever I hear about test scores, whenever they want more money, we're 49th in the world, for spending, or 49th in the country for spending. Whenever they need more money, but when they talk about how good their school is doing, then suddenly they're doing really good. But
well, what's interesting is when you start quoting statistics, and this can get difficult. Mark Twain said, "There's liars, there's damn liars, and then there's statisticians." Right? So, when we start comparing one resource to another or one statistic to another, oftentimes we can, for lack of understanding exactly what those statistics are representing and what what is the empirical data supporting it, we might be comparing apples to oranges. But the bottom line comes to the general. I just can't help but read the New England Primer, for example, which was the very first reading textbook that was produced in America and used as a resource for reading for grades elementary through middle school, and was used for decades, and was extremely successful. And yet, if you ever get a chance to read that, it's a small little book.
Oh yeah, I actually have several copies of that. It's amazing what a third grader is expected to know in the 1800s.
The vocabulary and the complexity and the conjugation of verbs and sentences within that little.
And not only that, the Catechism of the Constitution. You had to understand the Catechism of the Constitution before you get out of the third grade. And I dare say there's hardly a college professor with several PhDs walking around the U.S. today that has such knowledge,
Well, and unfortunately, we can't discuss the Constitution in our public school systems because the preamble mentions our Creator, and we have no room for God in our education edifices any longer.
Interesting.
Which is, I say that in jest. It's interesting that since 1963, which is pretty much the date which Supreme Court, in an unprecedented move, supported. It was the first time in U.S. history when a minority group was able to override the majority opinion and removed God. Because even today, if you
wait a minute, you mean the situation where a minority overrides the majority in this country? I thought we were a democracy here. What's going on?
Well, no, and interestingly enough, when you ask folks, what kind of government do we have in our education system, more often than not, you'll hear people say a democracy, and yet it's to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, that we pledge allegiance.
Well, you seem to be suggesting here, Shane, that our education was better before They took religion out of the schools.
Not only that, because I am suggesting that. In fact, I'll just come right out and state it, that when we had an education system that embraced not just a belief in God, but all of the various aspects and character traits that are espoused in, say, the 10 Commandments.
Sure.
You know, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie or bear false witness, and so forth. I mean,
life, liberty, and property, right there, the Ten Commandments, and also in the Declaration of Independence. Of course, how can you possibly have a civilization if you don't respect, first and foremost, those three things: life, liberty, and property?
You can't.
But
you can't. It's been shown historically. You just flat can't. I mean, you'll see the rise and fall of empires, and in every single case, the rise of the empire was based on the support structures and respect for individual civil liberties and the protections. The government offered protections of life, liberty, and property. When those empires began to fall, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, Byzantine Empire, and so forth, those empires fell when property, which is attached to and inseparable from life and liberty, right? When you take a person's property, well, you've taken their motivation for freedom of choice. You've taken their motivation to try to improve themselves and so forth. But once there is no respect for property and individual civil liberties, the society falls apart and relegates itself to civil war and until a new empire can be established.
And so I'm gleaning from what you're saying here that basically when people begin to trade their life, liberty, and property in exchange for security, they end up with none of the above.
I agree. So we started this as a result of bringing it back to school boards and individual school boards in local areas and to the public education system as a whole. You have at the end of one spectrum the Communist Manifesto that is a strong proponent of public education. You have as well. You have the U.S. Constitution, and after the establishment of our country at a federal level with the U.S. Constitution, there was the establishment of the Northwest Ordinance. And the Northwest Ordinance spelled out a public education system and some of the tenets of that public education system. So you have the Northwest Ordinance and the Communist Manifesto, both of them strong proponents of public education. So what's the difference? In the Communist Manifesto, public education is used as a tool to inform the masses as to how they will think, what they will learn. The government decides for them what's important for them to know. The Northwest Ordinance, however, believes and establishes a public education system that doesn't necessarily tell you what you should think or how you should think or what's important for you to know, but literally puts in place the resources and mechanisms so that you can learn and you can establish yourself among your peers and your citizenry to become a successful citizen, to become a better and more efficient citizen, a more responsible citizen, and so forth.
We're getting right down to the very fundamentals of what the purpose of education is all along. It seems to me like, based on this conversation, our current system leans a little closer to the Soviet model than it does the original American model that was set forth back in there.
You're absolutely right, and we're continuing to move more and more that way. The Communist Manifesto is right around the corner for us from a public education standpoint, because we have what's called Common Core curriculum standards.
Yes.
Now these Common Core curriculum
comes right down
standards,
from the government telling us what to think.
Exactly. They've been put together and established by the NAEP. That's a national or federal level of the the arm of the education.
And someone was telling me that in order for us, there was some money attached to this. In other words, they didn't tell us we had to do it. They said that we had the choice of taking it, but if we did take it, we would get some federal money. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that's the way this always happens.
Oh, somebody told me this. I had another school board member from another district tell me that it boils down to we sold our souls to the federal government for what amounts to $24 per student. And when you consider that we spend on average in the Phoenix area about $12,000 per student, we sold our souls for $24, which doesn't go very far in the overall thing. So not only did we sell our soul to the devil, we sold it really cheap. But I want to get back. I want to ask you before I forget. Of course, for personal reasons, you moved out of the district, and therefore you could no longer serve on the school board. But the process by which you are to be replaced, I find that process fascinating. And I guess we're getting away from the budget a little bit, but I think it's important for people to know what is the process by which members who leave their term and midterm, how are they replaced in Maricopa County?
In Maricopa County, and quite honestly, Harry, this may differ from one district to another in how they actually select the new appointee. But in Maricopa County, school districts are all run by county entities. And so in Maricopa County, all the school districts in Maricopa County report to and report through the county level Department of Education, and the superintendent of education for Maricopa County is Don Covey. Don Covey will appoint, and that's where the appointment comes from, is the county level. He will appoint my replacement. But that replacement is recommended to him, and how that replacement is recommended to him is what I'm saying may vary from one district to another. In the Gilbert Public School District, the way my replacement is selected, and just by the way, I know that I've mentioned this to you personally, and for those listening, I am torn about not being able to finish my term. I can't help but feel that I left a lot of things undone, and for circumstances beyond my control, I was not able to find a residence within the district and not able to continue my service. And for that, I really do feel bad, and wanted to thank all those who have supported me in the past. And so for all of you,
yeah,
go ahead, Harry.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't interrupt you because this is your time. Go ahead.
Well, for those of you who are interested in the future of Gilbert and how my replacement will be selected, in the Gilbert Public School System, you have a three-member board. That board is made up of the president of the school board, which currently is Ms. E.J. Anderson. The superintendent.
Oh, you mean five-member board?
No, it's three. There's a five-member school board.
Oh, I see, but the selection committee.
The selection committee for my replacement is three individuals.
Mm-hmm.
That's one member from the school board, which is the president, and that's currently E.J. Anderson. The superintendent of Gilbert Public Schools, which is Dr. Dave Allison. And interestingly enough, I found this to be somewhat disturbing for me personally, not because of the individual, but because of the position that they hold, is the president of the Gilbert Education Association, which is the teachers union. And that person is Diane Jasinski, and Diane's a neat lady. I've had an opportunity to talk with her, and I find her to be very intelligent and a neat lady to talk to. But without trying to pull any punches one way or the other or color anything in particular. We have to realize and recognize that the teachers union is a special interest group. And you're talking about now an organization that is going to replace an elected official. I was an elected official from the public with an appointee. So you have two out of these three individuals who are not elected people. The superintendent of Gilbert Public Schools, Dave Allison, and the president of the teachers union, for crying out loud, is not elected by the citizenry at large. These two people have a majority vote of this three-member board for who my replacement will be.
Well, I'm sure there will only be no bias in that decision-making process. And I said it facetiously, obviously, but I think even worse than that, of course, and then whatever suggestions that they make are obviously going to be biased. And then Dr. Covey, who's also a part of the school administration system in the state of Arizona, he's also going to be biased as well. Now, but I understand that there was a big stink going on up in Peoria School District about a similar situation where they were going to play somebody, and they had a situation where it was possible to have an election to let the people decide, and it was overridden by Dr. Covey, and there were some people, conservative board members, who were upset about that. So it seems that the deck is quite stacked against basically the interest of the public. You have the, as you say, the interest of the school district, which seems to be basically how to get more money, stacked against the public, who want to figure out how they can get more bang for their buck. But seems to we have a system that really is not working in the public interest here.
Well, Harry, we spend the state of Arizona education budget for K-12 is about $4.5 billion, and that amounts to half of our state.
But that's not even all the money they get. They get again that much or more from various, like from the feds and from various bond issues. Is that correct? I've had an opportunity to look at the budget, and there was something around. Well, this has been a couple of years ago now. It might be a little less, but it was something on the order of like $10 billion that was going into the K-12 system. At that time, it was like 60%. This was about a couple of years ago. It may have gone down a bit since, but certainly not drastically. But it's a remarkable amount of money.
Yeah, your point is well founded. It's certainly not the limitation of the amount of money they receive. I was just simply pointing out that of the state general fund, we spend half our money.
Right, general fund. Absolutely.
On education, and that's the point of that is an awfully big stick.
Yeah.
It's huge. And I mean, $4.5 billion. And when you think about that for just a moment, divide that by the 1.2 million students that we have in Arizona. That's about what our statewide enrollment is, 1.2 million. And the numbers become staggering as to what we're spending on students just from our general fund. That is a huge amount of money, a massive amount of money.
And that would automatically create a huge lobby in the State House, would it not?
It certainly does. It not only creates by lobby, yes, you have several interests that the single largest, and they are unabashed about it, is the Arizona School Board Association, which works hand in hand with the legislature on an agenda that is set on an annual basis. The Arizona School Board Association receives its money by charging individual school districts fees or dues. It's because it is subscription-based, so they're dues. and we hear that word used in relation to union membership, and indeed you could the correlation and the comparison is not too far apart. You have within individual school districts that are paying their subscription fees or their dues, out of about 240 different state school districts, the vast majority of them, over 200.
But they have a lot of money, but yet they're really not. They don't represent the majority of the teachers, though, do they?
As far as the union, no. The GEA, for example, and so I was talking about the ASBA, or the Arizona School Board Association.
Right.
But I think what you're referring to is the teachers union, or the GEA in Gilbert. The Gilbert Education Association accounts for about 34% of the overall teacher population. So,
isn't it true that Gilbert Public Schools actually has their very own lobbying firm?
Yes.
And now we have 227 school districts. You think that all of those 227 school districts each have their own lobbyist?
I doubt it. I mean, you have some school districts on the books that are,
not very big.
They're not very big at all. But certainly, I would say that that school districts similar in size and scope to Gilbert, absolutely, they most certainly have retained some sort of a legal a lobbying entity of some sort.
So
Gilbert Public Schools.
So now you've got
that lobbying entity. Just for anybody who's listening, that lobbying entity is Demena and Associates, with Shane Demena as the primary contact. And,
how you
and
spell
what's
that?
interesting in Demena, Demena. And what's interesting is when I started asking questions about this of our superintendency, I also asked, how many times have you spoken with or invited the state representatives, the legislators for our district? In Arizona, we have, people should know this, but if they don't, it's very quickly, Arizona is divided into 30 legislative districts.
Mm-hmm.
Of those 30 districts, there are 2 representatives and 1 senator. So our state legislature has a total of 90 people, 60 in the House, 30 in the Senate. That means that in our district, that Gilbert Public Schools is a member of, we have 3 legislators that Gilbert could go to. And, of course, that's going to change slightly with all the redistricting. But right now, today, there are 3 individuals that Gilbert Public Schools superintendency and administration could engage with on a regular basis for legislative concerns. Instead of spending $50,000 a year, which is our current ticket, to retain the services of Demena and Associates, and Demena and Associates is not beholden exclusively to GPS. As a matter of fact, they may find themselves in a situation where they're representing one school district with a contrary position to our own.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like one of our school board members who actually is marketing director of a school for the Mesa schools, which is another conflict. It's exactly the same thing.
Similar.
Interesting.
Very similar. But you would literally find yourself in a situation where we're spending $50,000 a year, whether that's right or wrong or indifferent, and I've got an opinion on that. Whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent, you literally have a situation where your lobbyist representing you is in front of the legislators and saying, now, for purposes of Gilbert and any other district that's on Gilbert's side, here is what their desires are with regards to this particular legislation, this particular bill. And oh, by the way, these other school districts that I represent have a contrary opinion.
So it might actually be a waste of money.
So the legislators sitting there scratching their head saying, okay, Mr. Demena and Associates, what is your position then? Well, my position is that I'm going to continue to take the money from the school districts that they offer me, and I'll let you flip the coin and decide.
Well, now, this is we're spending $50,000 for a lobbyist, which is questionable, and then we're not really necessarily getting somebody who's working their interest. But here you have all these basically lobbying entities. You have for the school, the school teacher union, and there's more than one. We talk about that one particular union, I guess, which is the biggest one. But there are at least one other in the area that I know of. Then you got the ASBA, the Arizona School Board Association, and then you've got these other organizations like Plan and Expect More Arizona, and there's a couple more out there that receive their money from, well, fill in the blank, and they're also advocating for this. And then we've got this huge charity raising arm of the public schools, and was the charity, I mean, I guess that varies from district to district, but that can be a lot of money too, on top of all the other money, on top of the federal money, on top of the bond issues, on top of the general fund, and then all the lobbying, and then you've got people giving charity to the schools. That's a pretty good chunk of money, and do we really know how much money that is? And Gilbert, is that reported? Do we know?
It's reported where it has to be. So if it falls under a category of needs to be reported, then it is. And there are very few. I'm just going to simply say that I don't think there are any areas. I do believe that the Gilbert Public Schools does its due diligence to report monies that are spent. But I think that Gilbert Public Schools is no different than any other entity, public entity, and herein lies some of the rub. You have reports that are required by the Arizona Department of Education, okay, the state board or state entity that governs education, and there are certain reports that have to be filled out. It's kind of like doing your taxes, you know. Add up all of these particular types of expenses and include them on line A, and then all of these types of expenses, but accept these kinds of expenses on line B. And so how those categories of expenses or categories of spending are identified will vary from one district to the other. I can give you a case in point. The Chandler School District, for example, pays some administrators of a particular class more than Gilbert. And so it's difficult for Gilbert to compete with Chandler in certain areas. And yet when you look at the overall reports on spending, administrative spending as a percentage of the overall budget, Chandler is no different. In fact, they're lower than Gilbert in a few areas. How is that possible? How is it possible that Gilbert can actually be spending more on the reports, but then having a difficult time competing with Chandler because we have Chandler coming and soliciting our employees? It's an interesting situation, and what you have to look at and realize is they're playing the game. They're classifying certain expenses differently than Gilbert is.
I see. Well,
and that's where you run into issues with when you look at the Arizona Department of Education reports that say, for example, that we have 18 students to one teacher in a classroom. It gives the idea that our classroom size is 18, is an average of 18, when that's far from the truth. Our actual classroom size is 27 students on average per classroom.
Yeah,
and you'll find this disparity in most large districts. When you look at the ADE reports, Arizona Department of Education, those reports are horrible because of how they call for the accounting of the teachers.
Now, what is that disparity? I've been personally trying to find out the answer to this question for a very long time now, and I never really got an answer that. I mean, the answer that I got was 2 + 2 = 5. So, go away.
So in general, here's a general explanation, and when we were to if we're to tally up all of the students, and then tally up all of the teachers that actually have face time with the kids, they spend their time in the classroom, we have an average of 27 students per class, per teacher. However, you have other staff members that are classified, that are considered certified. I shouldn't say classified because there is an actual category of employee called classified.
Classified and certified.
And those are the two different categories. There's certified, meaning they carry a teaching certificate, administered and distributed by the state Board of Education, or they're classified. Now, classified employees would be your mechanics for that work on the buses, for example, all of the bus drivers, all of your custodians and groundskeepers, and a lot of your office staff and the individual schools for the administrators that answer the phones, the receptionists and secretaries and so forth. Classified staff, all of them. But certified staff.
Yeah, certified
staff. Those that carry teaching certificates. Those could include your department heads that may spend time in the classroom. They may not. Your principals and assistant principals, certified. I mean, they were teachers once. They have a teaching certificate. They move into a dean of students or a assistant principal or principal position. They still have their teaching certificate, so they're still certified staff.
Are they getting?
So
getting
they're
paid
included in that number.
They're included in that number, they're getting paid.
When you take your overall student enrollment, your student body, you then have and divide by the total number of certified employees, not just the certified employees that are in classrooms, but total number of certified employees. That's where that 18 comes from.
So you got one, but those people are not paid as teachers; they're paid as administrators. Is that correct?
That's correct, but they still hold a teaching certificate, so they're still classified, or they're
still they're counted in both categories. They're counted as administrators and are also counted as teachers.
Yes.
They're paid as administrators, but they're counted as teachers.
For purposes of the the Arizona Department of Education report, they are categorized as teachers.
Well, that's news. So perhaps I have that question answered now, although I don't have anything official from the district, and I don't think I shall ever. I don't know why they're so protective of that particular piece of information, but nevertheless, that's sort of not the answer that they gave me, by the way.
That answers can sound bad, right? I mean, that can be spun into, oh, well, then you're just playing games with the reports. Well, that's a glass half empty perspective. What they're doing is they are filling out the reports for the Department of Education, the Arizona Department of Education. And anytime you do that, you're going to be filling out a report that paints you in the best light. So, short of actually committing fraud, right, which would be misrepresenting the truth or misreporting, leaving something out that you should have included, for example. What they're doing is they're including everything that they should. They're just including everything and then some. So it's not just teachers in the classroom. It's because I'm allowed to count all of my certified employees. Why wouldn't I? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially when there are funds attached, and there are. When there are funds attached to having a lower count of students in the classroom, students per classroom, because that's an incentive that Arizona uses for funding. If you have a lower per student in the classroom count, you get more money.
Mm-hmm.
Now that seems a little backwards, doesn't it?
Yeah, kind of does. Now moving on from this point, now we have touched on, of course, the budget committee and a number of other things relating to the budget, but what I'd like to know is, obviously, since you found this particular budget meeting to be disappointing in its results, what would you suggest be the next step as far as getting more transparency from the district?
More transparency from the district is there is a momentum moving through. There's a software program for example, and I can't recall what it's called offhand, but effectively what it is it makes the books completely open by putting all of the expenses. Basically, it's the check register almost available online. So you and I and Joe down the street can get online and can go into see, this check was written for this amount to so and so. It's almost that granular. Here's the problem with that sort of a thing. You need a Rosetta Stone to translate the accounting
codes. Yeah.
Yeah. What is it? What is it we're really spending money on?
You were talking about one of the board, not board, the committee, budget committee members talking about how they found a budget code which is X million dollars, and it was just a code, and he asked the district financial director what that account code was, and he couldn't say what it was. So you've got the situation where the account codes are not even known to the people who are in charge of the darn thing, which seems odd. So how can anybody know what's going on? So in other words, even if we get every single check, everything's made by account code. So even then, we still wouldn't know what's going on. So I guess at that point, we'd have to have like we say, a Rosetta Stone or a table of contents or a key that would tell people what those account codes mean in plain English. Because I have a copy of the budget myself as in digital and hard copy format, and I can't make heads or tails out of any of it because I'm using all these opaque terms that no one would know, and perhaps if you're an accountant, you would know what some of those terms were. But even then, I think that some of those terms would be strange to a typical accountant and peculiar to public school district budgets. But anyway, I will have to ask you: do you have any future plans working with school boards? I guess you're in the Higley School District.
I am. I'm now in the Higley School District, and as far as future plans, one of the requirements is that you have to live in a particular school district for at least a year before you can run. And of course, our election cycle is every 2 years. And so, 2 years from now, there may be an opportunity to get involved. At the school district level, it would be the Higley School District. I am not committed to getting involved in that just yet, but I'm also, I haven't decided to not. I remain, for me personally, I feel a responsibility to my children and my children's children to try to make this country, leave it as good or better than when I found it. And unfortunately, I find myself in a situation where my children don't have it as good as I did when I was a kid. When I was a kid, the rule was come home when the street lights turn on, and I was able to be out and about. And playing with friends and doing whatever. And when the streetlights came on, I was home. My kids do not live in that kind of a environment. They don't live in that day and age. We live in a day and an age where even when we're in our own homes, our front door is locked.
Yes, well,
most people don't let their kids play out in the front yard that might only be 10, 20, 30 feet from the road.
Oh, when I was growing up, I grew up in a small town in Virginia, and my time to be home was 10 o'clock at night. And we would, as kids, we'd play around the neighborhood till 10 o'clock at night. We'd play tag and,
Wow, your curfew is much later than mine.
there was no worry about anything. We just, they wanted us to be home so we could be home in time to go to bed.
Right.
To get up in the morning. That was really their only concern or requirement, that we came home to eat, and the rest of the time we just played in the neighborhood, we just now. I mean, I was at the Kmart the other day, and I was just looking to buy a thermos bottle, and some parent's kid came running through the store and got away from the parents some kind of a way. And there were two employees, immediately chasing the child down because, they were terrified that someone might snag the child. And things like that were unheard of in our day. No one ever thought of it. It wasn't even a thought in a person's brain. No one ever heard of anything like that. And because it just didn't happen. And now, like you say, you can't take your eyes off your child for a minute. I mean, it's bad. And I guess it goes back to the original thing that we talked about before about taking the Bible out of school. But, Mr. Shane, I want to wish you well in all your endeavors, and I personally want to thank you for your service on the school board. I think that that's a very important position and one that I would like to see more people take an interest in. And once again, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to visit with us today, and I'm sure our listeners are grateful as well. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank you once again for your service to Gilbert Public Schools Governing Board. And I'd like to leave you with this quote from Abraham Lincoln: "The philosophy of the classroom today will be the philosophy of government tomorrow." Thank you for joining us today on the Education Action Network radio show. Until next time, Harry Matthews with the Education Action Network.